Our health and well-being has never been more important than it is today in this era of reset. So it's a great pleasure for me to welcome to our 2020 online trend summit, Beth Edwards of Beth Edwards Nutrition. As a registered nutritionist, we've invited Beth to leverage her expertise in health psychology, her experience in clinic, and her work with brands to share with us today the emerging trends in health and wellness. Welcome, Beth. It's great to hear today. So what does that future horizon look like for health and wellness?
Thanks for having me, Charles. Well, it's a very exciting horizon, so I'm going to dive into the slides and get going.
Fantastic.
Great. So thank you so much, Charles, and the whole Food People team for having me here today. It's really exciting to be part of the Food People's annual trend event. And I'm very excited to be discussing today health and wellness. And it's very exciting to see that health has got a very firm seat at the table. So as Charles mentioned, my name is Beth Edwards. I'm a registered nutritionist and I have a background in health psychology and food trends. Very excited today to bring to life a little bit of my clinical experience and my work with brands to try and help forecast what's going to be happening in health and wellness in the months and years to come. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, I want to start by explaining the journey to you. So I would like to take you on a journey of the perspective of a 21st century consumer who is interested in their health. So we'll start at the beginning and the why. This will help us set the scene for why these health trends are around and why they resonate with your consumers. We'll then dive into some of the industry trends and look at how these trends overlap with the science, starting with individualized health, and then why that's so important today. We'll then dive into the latest in gut health and in mental health, and then we'll share the important links between the two as well. And from mental health, this is a nice stepping point into talking about sleep and the links with sleep and the trends around why it's important to get enough shut-eye every night. And then finally, we'll finish with some nice examples of a few brands who are leveraging the power of health trends to great effect. So let's think about the why. So lots of trends I'm going to touch on today were indeed around last year, but their evolution and their adoption by consumers has really been expedited by one crucial factor. That is COVID-19. So COVID really has come along and focused our energies on our minds, on how we can stay healthy. So everybody is thinking about immunity and people are thinking about the individual level. So they want to understand more around what they can do in terms of lifestyle, food and supplements to best support their specific health needs and prevent catching the virus. So now there is this huge opportunity for education. And one point I really want to get across here is that we should be thinking about health and immunity for the long run. We should be thinking about laying down the foundations of good immune health each and every day for now and the future. And we know that immunity is very much interlinked with longevity. And so if you want to live a long and healthy life free from chronic disease burden, you've got to be thinking about optimal immune health. So my point really here is that optimal health is for life, not just for COVID. And before I move off immunity and COVID, that's a final bit about COVID, I promise, I wanted to provide some context. So really, since the dawn of time, that we have had this battle between us and germs. So we are trying to keep them out and they are trying to infect us. And germs are everywhere. They're on our skin, in our air that we breathe in. And 90% of the time, these germs don't want to do us any harm and actually can be quite beneficial to us. But unfortunately, there has always been this huge risk of infection and a pandemic is one of the most serious risks. But I wanted to sort of say that by and large, most of the time, when times are good, we actually live quite harmoniously with germs. And indeed, we actually need exposure to these germs in order to develop a robust immune system in early childhood. So it's about a balance. Okay, so we know that health on the individual level is important, but never more so when never more so than now when other aspects of life feel out of control. So there's not much you can really do to get around a national lockdown, but you can focus on individual health practices and behaviours. For example, people taking up new exercise regimes during lockdown, or a revitalised focus on self-care, or perhaps reductions in alcohol consumption that some people are adopting. So wearable tech, I mean, this has been around for a while now, and we're all getting used to the concept of heart rate monitors, etc. But it seems that the world of personalized gadgets and devices really is exploding. So whether that's an Aura ring that can provide personalized data on sleep, activity, on your recovery rates from exercise, or perhaps blood glucose monitoring equipment to measure glucose levels across the day, there seems to be this interest in this tech and this data. And notably, this interest in medical devices may not be due to a diagnosed illness. It could just be an individual desire for optimal functionality. So it might be that there's nothing wrong at baseline, but you want to make baseline better. We're also seeing an increase in health literacy. So as a result of the pandemic, consumers are educating themselves. They're becoming ever more aware of health and nutrition, particularly regarding specific micronutrients that may not really have been on the radar previously. Like, for example, vitamin D is getting a lot of attention in the media right now in relation to COVID, but also things like zinc and vitamin C. And additionally, this increased consumer understanding of health is linked, I believe, to the uptake in veganism. So the vegan community is becoming much more aware of key nutrients that can only be found in meat-based sources, like, for example, B12. And then people who follow a vegan or plant-based diet are now supplementing with B12 to make sure they're not deficient. And also this notion of specificity is important, particularly if we're viewing health through the lens of the gut. So we know that specific strains of bacteria that are found in our gut can be important for certain health conditions or symptoms, but we'll come on to this in a little bit. So let's dive into the gut. So you may have heard people talk around this concept of the gut microbiome, and this actually refers to the trillions of bacteria that reside inside the gut. And in fact, 90% of the body, of your cells in the body are actually bacteria cells, which leaves just 10% as human cells. So I find that both incredible and quite off-putting that we are actually more bacteria than we are human. But there is quite a huge caveat here. And I should say that whilst it's true that 90% of cells in the body are bacterial cells, they're actually much smaller in size than most of your own human cells, and therefore only make up about 3% of body mass. So the microbiome in the gut weighs about 2 kilograms, but there are other microbiomes across the body in the oral cavity and vaginal and urinary microbiomes too. But the gut microbiome is almost considered to be an organ in its own right, and perhaps it could be just as important to your health and happiness as your genes. And when it comes to a healthy microbiome, diversity is key. And there is this concept of microbial diversity, and this just refers to the different types of bacterial strains in our gut. Research would suggest that the more species of bacteria we have, probably the better health outcomes we'll have too. And conversely, on the flip side, having a limited species of bacteria in the gut actually means we're more at risk of illness. And I've put a quote in here at the bottom from Tim Spector. And Tim is a researcher and epidemiologist at King's College in London. And he says that everyone's gut microbiome is unique to them, just like a fingerprint. And these individual differences could actually explain why some people are susceptible to illness and others don't get ill, or indeed why some people can be asymptomatic with COVID, whereas other people have had very serious and adverse health outcomes. So again, here is this concept of specificity and diversity. And when it comes to Gut Health 101, I like to think of this concept of the trio of glory. So in this trio, we have probiotics, fiber, and prebiotics. And we'll talk about each of these in a bit more detail now. So firstly, probiotics. These are live bacteria that can be ingested. And probiotics can help support bacteria that already live inside our guts. And probiotics are known by their genus, their species, and their strain. So for example, Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG. And historically, we thought that probiotics used to work by repopulating the gut, sort of reseeding the gut with healthy strains of bacteria. But we actually now know that this doesn't happen. So when you take a probiotic, it travels straight through your digestive system and out the other end. But as the probiotics travel through, they do interact with immune cells, with gut cells, with dietary fiber, and the microbes that already live in your gut. And this is how they can exert their positive benefits for us. And actually, this can even happen if those probiotic strains are dead. So supposedly these live bacteria should be live, and they should be live cultures. But even with the best will in the world, these strains do degrade either in a product or a capsule. So for example, say you buy a kombucha from the chilled aisle in Pret, and you take it outside, have a quick walk, and then maybe you drink it. Some of the strains in the kombucha may have died off, in the time between being in the chiller and hitting your mouth. So probiotics can work incredibly well. I see this in my clinical experience, so particularly for conditions like IBS or inflammatory bowel disease, or even in fact chronic UTIs, probiotics can be very, very useful. But word of warning, they are not a panacea, unfortunately, and they are not appropriate for everybody. So it's not really the case that more is more. It's thinking about targeted usage and being careful when you do decide to take them. Always speak to a professional about that. So if probiotics don't repopulate the gut, how can we change this microbiome diversity? Well, the only way to do that is through food and drink. And fibre seems to be the most important and most helpful way of feeding species in the gut and encouraging this diversity. So fibres from plant-based foods will feed the different types of species of bacteria. So having a wide and varied diet can be a really useful thing to do. And fibre can't be digested or absorbed in the small intestine, but is instead partially broken down in the large intestine by the bacteria that live there. So this brings me on to prebiotics now, the third part. And prebiotics are a special type of plant-based fibre. So fibre is like the umbrella term, and then prebiotics are one type of fibre. And prebiotics are very stable, and they can reach the lower intestinal tract intact. And there they can feed the good bacteria, which actually significantly increases populations of bacteria in the guts. And prebiotic sources in foods would be things like oats, garlic, onions, asparagus, bananas, but also things like sugar alternatives made from inulin and chicory fibre. So a couple of brands we're seeing are using these fibres as a sugar alternative because consumers are shying away from sugar. So it has that added benefit of both being not traditional sugar form, but it being prebiotic as well. And like I've said, variety really is the spice of life. So eating the rainbow, it's a bit of a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. And finally, there is a caveat here as well to say that the research is developing all the time. So we know a lot more today than we did, say, even 12 months ago, but there's still more that we don't know. So it's a kind of watch this space to see how it evolves in the coming months. Okay, so how does the gut interact with the rest of the body? So the medical paradigm likes to compartmentalize our body. So if you have a digestive problem, your GP will probably refer you on to a gastroenterologist. And while specialisms can be necessary, our body doesn't work in these silos. So everything is interconnected, hence why I want you to be thinking about guts and beyond. The microbiome in the gut does not work in isolation. It communicates with other bodily systems, including immunity and the nervous system. So, as I like to tell my clients, and I have a little chuckle every time I say it, but what happens in the gut doesn't stay there. So your gut is not like Las Vegas. It is not a sacred, special, secretive place. It communicates outwards. So you may be aware that one of the gut's jobs is all to do with immunity. And the gut has a huge role in immunity, and it has about up to 80% of immune cells that are living in there. And Fiona Powrie, she's got some fantastic research coming out of Ireland. She says actually the immune system can shape all of these gut bugs, and then the gut bugs shape the immune system. So it's this bi-directional relationship, and it's a very dynamic one. It's constantly updating, constantly tweaking. Messages are being sent from the gut to the immune system and vice versa. And when it comes to brain health, we know that this is also closely linked to the health of the gut. So neurotransmitters are made in the gut, and we can think of the microbiome as like the second brain, something implicated in digestion, hormone production and regulation, energy production, and circadian rhythm. And there are two main ways that the gut, this second brain, can communicate with our first brain up here. So one of the first ways is this gut-brain axis. So you may have heard of that, but this is the idea that there's this bidirectional communication going on between the brain and the gut. So we used to think traditionally that this was a one-way system. So we used to think that it was only messages from the brain that would get sent down to the gut. So for example, if you're feeling a bit nervous about something, or you're late for work, or Charles, you're putting on a big trend event, you may be feeling a little bit nervous and you might feel that as butterflies in your tummy. But now we actually know that what's going on in your gut, if that's unhappy, that can be communicated back up towards the brain. And the second way that these two systems are linked, so gut health and brain health are linked, is that there are 8 neurotransmitters that affect happiness. These include things like serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, and 90% of serotonin is made in your gut, and around 50% of dopamine is made in there too. And these neurotransmitters can partially determine how you feel on a day-to-day basis. So it stands to reason that if the microbiome is out of balance and the neurotransmitters aren't being produced effectively, your mental health could suffer. So let's think a bit more about mental health in a bit more detail now. So we know that ordinarily mental health disorders account for almost a quarter of the total burden of ill health in the UK. As in a pandemic, and we can see, increases in mental health struggles. So for example, recent research that came out suggested that 69% of adults in the UK reported feeling somewhat or very worried about the effect COVID-19 was having on their life. So clearly a focus on mental health is important now, and also as we move into the next phase of lockdown, vaccine trials and beyond. So if we think about food for mood, let's spend a bit of time here. So we know that serotonin, as previously mentioned, is the neurotransmitter responsible for making you feel happy and rested. Tryptophan is an amino acid, so it's a type of protein. And actually tryptophan is a precursor to serotonin. So it's like the building block that you need to make serotonin, this happy hormone. And tryptophan can be found in things like turkey, oats, eggs, spinach, bananas. And it's really important to think about getting those types of food into your diet. But also scientists have found that meals rich in carbohydrates can make it easier for tryptophan to cross the blood-brain barrier, thus increasing serotonin levels in the brain. So it's important not to underestimate the roles of carbohydrates in this picture. They're very important in terms of building up this serotonin picture. But it's also partly why low-carb diets, I don't know if any of you have tried low-carb diets, but one of the symptoms of them can be a sort of low irritable feeling. And one of the reasons you might feel like that is because carbs are needed to make the serotonin piece. So I never recommend a low-carb or a keto approach in my clinic. However, it's still a trend that we see in the health landscape at the moment. And magnesium. So magnesium is an absolute powerhouse of a nutrient. It's involved in over 300 processes in the body. And we know that it's involved as a cofactor in making serotonin. So, and it also makes other neurotransmitters as well, like dopamine and GABA. So when we're thinking about magnesium-rich foods, we're thinking about the dark green leafy veg, nice whole grains, avocados, nuts, and seeds. And then omega-3s. So many studies have suggested a link between omega-3s, which are an essential fatty acid, and an improvement in mood disorders. So we're thinking here about oily fish, trying to get 3 portions in across the week, some salmon, some herring, mackerel, sardines, anchovies, or you could also try some plant-based sources like chia seeds, flax seeds, and walnuts. And we also see this sort of low and no movement. So it's both low and no in terms of alcohol and caffeine. So we know that caffeine and coffee can increase feelings of anxiety. And we're seeing people to switch to more sort of gentler forms of caffeine found in green tea rather than coffee, or perhaps trying hot cacao or even adaptogenic teas. And people are also reducing their alcohol intakes as well, switching to lower ABV offers or going booze-free altogether. Coming on to stress. So we know that stress has a huge impact on all areas of life, notably mental health and gut health. Hence why we're seeing this big increase in yoga, meditation, breath work, and self-care just across the board. And then this is also linked to CBD. So CBD has really moved centre stage in this stress management space. And whilst I'd say the research around CBD isn't fully there, anecdotally, I have seen it work very well with clients due to its anti-anxiety properties, but it also has anti-inflammation properties as well. So it's ticking a couple of boxes there, which is useful. And finally, adaptogens, which you may have heard of. So adaptogens can help maintain the body's innate immune system. So they literally help the immune system adapt to the stress around them, around the individual. And adaptogens come in a different array of different forms, but things like medicinal mushrooms like reishi, chaga, rhodiola, ginseng, ashwagandha are a couple. And ideally, what we would like to happen in the sort of perfect world is that people actually reduce their stress levels. But when the stress is inevitable and unavoidable, like for example, if someone's going through bereavement, adaptogens can be helpful at just keeping somebody going, keeping them steady. But the key point I want to make here is when we're thinking about sort of communications with consumers, it's that this has to be a consistent and sort of prolonged consumption. So having a bit of ashwagandha here or a bit of chaga there isn't really going to do much. What's important is having it across months because it's a very slow acting, slow moving herb. Okay, so on to sleep, one of my favourite things. So one of the best things you can do for your health is sleep, and to do it properly and to do it for long enough. Sleep impacts everything. Again, it's coming back to immunity, brain health, gut health. And we sort of want to be getting between 7 and 9 hours. 8 is ideal if you can hit that. But this focus on sleep is so important, and it's really coming through in lots of sleep promoting products we're seeing and consumables. And there's also a growing interest in establishing the body's correct circadian rhythm. So we know that human metabolism is adapted to a circadian rhythm of about 24 hours, and that is synchronized to the Earth's 24-hour light-dark cycle. So this rhythm is orchestrated by the brain's central clock, which is found in the hypothalamus. And this central clock talks to sort of peripheral clocks in the rest of the body. And these clocks exist in pretty much almost all cells and are comprised of the helpfully named clock genes. So this is why you'll hear people like me talking about getting clients to open their curtains in the morning, letting lots of nice sunlight shine on their retinas, and then at the end of the day, making sure that you're blocking out that blue light at night time so that you can sleep properly. And that sort of indicates the rise in the blue light blocking glasses, but also how you can change your phone screen to make the blue light not come through so that you can sleep well. And interestingly, the characteristics of the gut microbiome and metabolism are related to a person's sleep and their circadian rhythm. So again, thinking about this concept of the body being interconnected and interlinked. We're also seeing things like weighted blankets come back in popularity, as well as things like Sleep Mat, which is a brand. And it's a handmade cotton blanket that actually emits electromagnetic frequencies in the form of soothing vibrations. And it's meant to be designed to help your brain waves slow down to the frequencies needed for optimum sleep. We're also seeing nerveines and herbs, combining my words there. So nerveines are herbs that can support the nervous system. So they are things like skullcap, chamomile, and catnip. They're all quite mildly calming, but you can get stronger nerveines like valerian and hops. And finally, tart cherry is also growing in popularity. There's more research around tart cherry now, and it's actually very high in concentrations of melatonin, which is the hormone needed for sleep. So there's interesting research going on with tart cherry to keep an eye on. And finally, let's look at some trend manifestations. So some interesting brands leveraging the power of these health trends here. So firstly, on the left, this is a dietary supplement from a company called Your Heights. It's a UK-based company. And the supplement is targeting brain health, and it's got 20 specific nutrients in there, omegas, zinc, selenium, B vitamins. And their tagline is designed by neuroscientists because your brain deserves expertise. It's pretty cool. So really, it's highlighting a clear function backed up by science. And the example in the middle, this is from Three Spirits, and they are a UK-based drinks company creating alternatives to alcoholic beverages. So their strapline is alcohol-free, powered by plants. And the nightcap, that's a picture of the nightcap there, it's aimed at improving sleep, and it contains a nice mix of those nervines we just mentioned and some adaptogens. So it's got valerian in there, lemon balm, ashwagandha, turmeric, black pepper. And it's quite a nice play on words because it's sort of taking the traditional alcoholic nightcap and sort of turning it on its head and talking about sleep promotion. And then finally, T2 in the end there. They have released a tea duo. So these are two different types of gut supporting teas with different functions. So they have the Belly Blend, which is a nice blend of black tea, carob, chicory and marshmallow root. And that supports just general gut health and aids digestion across the board. They also have the Tummy Tea, which is a more acute dose, and you can use that to sort of soothe an upset stomach due to overindulgence, and it's got a nice mix of fennel and peppermint and licorice in there. So some nice examples there. So there we go. That's a quick tour of the consumer mindset towards health right now. So as a little recap, we started right at the beginning and talking about why health has never been more important than it is now. Thank you, COVID. Then we discuss some industry health trends and how these align with the science and the research and how that can look clinically as well as from a brand perspective. And then we finish off with some nice examples of some brands doing things quite well.
Beth, thank you so much for that incredibly thought-provoking and insightful look at health and wellness in this reset era, where it seems to me that health is quite literally your wealth. Not a term I'm a great fan of, but I think it really is. It feels so much more than, how can health be so much more than health? But that's how it feels in this era. So thank you for sharing your thoughts and your insight on that. It's been a great pleasure to welcome you to our virtual stage today. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles, for having me. Thank you very much.